You know, Bobby, you should write a memoir because you have such interesting stories.
There's many, so many. I mean, I've gotten to work with the best of the best, and I've been introduced to the worst of the worst. I was told one time that um, I would meet the underworld in this business, and I laughed. Being from New York, and one time I got caught up in a situation where this guy who was a descendant of Al Capone, believe it or not, Al Capone sent people to Hawaii in the 30s to take over the docks, like they did for most of our country. And what ended up happening was one of my writers was being taken advantage of, and the uncle stepped in, and they thought it was my fault, and I had to come and explain myself to this guy. And after I explained to him using numbers and intellect, he he started praising me and wanted to become my partner. So I had to somehow or the other scoot through that, say thank you very much. I'm glad you're not going to kill me. I'm glad you see I'm on your side helping your nephew. And it's a lot of things like that happens. And
Joining me is Bobby Pileggi. He is award-winning record producer, music publisher, message songwriter who writes to correct the wrong ways in life. He's also a poet, and he's here today to talk about his award-winning career, how it all began, and what is next for him. Welcome, Bobby.
thank you, Christine. What a pleasure to be here. I know we've been planning this for a while, and as they say in Dunkin' Donuts, it was worth the trip. And appreciate you sharing some time with me and let me tell my story so that others can hear and be inspired, and they can take their own journeys if they choose to in the music business.
Well, you know what? I just love your background. Hawaii. So where are you in Hawaii? And can you give us a
Let me
tour?
give you a little. Yeah, sure. I'm on the island of Molokai, and Molokai, Hawaii has 8 islands, and Molokai is known as the Friendly Island. Population 7,000 people. Actually, 7,002 two babies were born last night, and
Okay.
it's a terrible joke. Uh, so anyway, everybody knows everyone over here. It's a combination of um, Andy Mayberry meets Northern Exposure on Gilligan's Island, and it's everyone gets along here. It's one big family island, and I made the interesting introduction to this island back in 1991, and I never even dreamed that I would be living here. But let me give you a little tour, okay?
Yes.
This is the backyard. That island right there is the island of Lanai. Can you see it?
Yes.
That's Lanai. This is this is my palm tree. This I planted about 2 years ago. This palm tree, right, and just from a coconut. And this is my baby. This one I planted 7 years ago. Look how it's growing. And these are, if you can see it, these are secret fish ponds here. The Hawaiians would build these walls. They built a human wall, a human assembly line up over the mountains carrying these huge rocks. And they built these ponds so the fish would come in and they would feed their families. And this is what's left of my garden. I have a big deer problem, but I take up gardening, and that's the backyard. And then they got the mountains in the back. Can you see it? Can you see it, Christine?
Yes. Yes. It's just gorgeous. I was just going to say it looks so inviting, like, running on the beach or taking a walk or a stroll. I mean, it's just gorgeous. And I like your philosophy of life. If you conceive and you believe, you will achieve, and that you have with over 35 years of experience. I understand you were New York, Manhattan, New York, and you started your career as a corporate DJ, correct?
Well, basically, the story all began. My philosophy is music is my life, and my life is music. And all my life, music has been a part of me. It's my inspiration, it's my perspiration, and it's my exhilaration. And it all started um, at a very young age, where music had it always resonated and and gave me energy. Music is an energy, and unbeknownst to me, scientifically, it proved to be true. And what happened was the story began really in when President Kennedy was assassinated. I was in fourth grade at the time. And what ended up happening was I was in the lunchroom, was a little kid, and there was an announcement on the PA that our president had been assassinated. And I couldn't even believe it. And at that point, I was so moved by it. I wrote a poem about it. I actually won an award about it too. And it was kind of a silly little poem, but it was the beginning. It was the spark that started the heartbeat of my journey as a writer. And as time went by, I found myself in high school, and if one of my friends brought this to my attention just a few years ago, that I was in high school cafeteria playing records during lunch hour, and I completely forgot. And little did I know that in 1975, I was given an opportunity to live in Manhattan, Upper West Side, not too bad of an area, and I worked for a company called Disco Van 2000, and they were the pioneers of mobile DJs back then. And we we had our trials and tribulations back then. It was we used to lug records and amplifiers and turntables, and it definitely caused some long-term damage 40 years later, but it was worth the trip. And what ended up happening was, as time went by, I found myself just kind of waking up in these musical periods of time where things were happening to me, positive, all because of my allegiance to music. Music is like my second religion. Um, there I was in high school in the 70s, playing records in the cafeteria. All of a sudden, fast forward, there I was in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, pioneering in the early days of mobile DJ. Then, fast forward a few years later, I was working in record stores. I worked at Sam Goody's. I worked at Disco Mat. Fast forward, I was working in clubs. I started DJing in clubs in the 70s, and I got to experience all of the magic, the energy of actually beginning to make a career out of music. And in 1980, I took a break. I got a job selling on the phone, and I was selling industrial chemicals. And funny thing, I was using different voices because I do impersonations and stuff. So I was on the phone one particular morning in October 1982, and I was using a female voice selling a sheriff in Mississippi industrial cleaners. Using my southern voice, y'all. And I really got to know how dirty men were. And so anyway, so what happened was, at the time that I was doing this pitch, the guy in the office next door heard these voices coming out of my office. And he came in, his name was Jack Michaels, and he came in and he said, he had a Queen's accent. He goes, "Wow, you're really good. You should be doing voiceovers." And I said, that's a possibility. I took some courses in it, but my real forte is DJing. So we had lunch the next day, and lo and behold, 1 month later, I found myself in another musical situation where he came to me, he throws this magazine down, New York Magazine, and it has the Water Club on it. And the Water Club was this posh restaurant, which was a converted barge on the East River. on right on what East 23rd Street. And he says, how would you like to work there? And I went, sure. And next minute, you know, I found myself doing a gig there. I used bubble gum and paper clips. I ended up hiring a sound guy, a lighting guy, just putting this all together because I just had records at the time. And I literally put together my first mobile DJ. And that one job turned into 50 the next. And it just exponentially started. And I met all sorts of people. The place, the Water Club was the in where everyone would go. That's where I met Clive Davis. That's where I met Dave Gianelli from MetLife. He was the head meeting planner. I met actors and actresses and all sorts of record industry people. And I became a corporate DJ from that point on. And what happened was in less than 4 years, I was traveling 250,000 miles a year.
Wow.
Living out of a suitcase, but living like a rock star, Christine. I was staying at Four Seasons, Carlton hotels, doing absolutely incredible. I got to travel the world. I worked in Montreal. I worked in Vancouver. I worked at is it Whistler Mountain?
Whistler,
Worked there. Call world from Monaco, France, with Paul Anka as he rewrote the song "My Way" and called it Met's Way, to doing Frank Sinatra's 85th birthday at the Golden Nugget, to working for that ex-nut in our White House, Donald J. Trump. I used to do all his casinos. And it just kept growing and growing and growing. And then in 1988, I found myself flying to Hawaii. And I did a show there with Benny King and the Shirelles. And I fell in love with the weather. Being from New York, dealing with the winter, you know what it's like. It's brutal. And I remember getting in the Jeep one day and I just drove blindly and I was on the island of Maui. I ended up on a place called Iao Valley, which was it's this huge pinnacle mountain. It looks like it's lush. It's a big green mountain, Iao Valley. And I went there and I had some unique experiences where I started having dreams. And when I woke up from taking a nap on the rock, I saw all the water red. And I wrote this poem. And later on, I was reciting it 2 years later before a kuma hula, which is a hula teacher. Kuma means a teacher, hula teacher. And she says, wow, Bobby, you just some history. That's where a big battle happened. And all these Hawaiians were killed in battle defending the land, and the water ran with red water, the blood. The water was red from blood. So I'm like, wow, there's really a connection here. And then in 1991, I found myself on the island of Molokai. A friend took me here and said, you have to see this place. You're a person of spiritual, you're a person of musical. Something good will happen to you here. And I couldn't believe it. I drove up and down the island, people waving to you. In New York, when people wave to you and smile, they're either crazy or they want to rob you, or they're crazy and they want to rob you. And, it was a whole different environment here. And all throughout this time, throughout my travels, I would always take solace in writing poetry on the plane, pass the time. So when I got to Molokai, this family immediately embraced me. They were activist, radical, connected, respected people here. And they had 11 children.
Wow.
And those 11 children had many, many friends. So I found myself, again, another flash forward, where I was sitting in a circle like Hans Christian Andersen, reciting poetry to all these little kids. And they were loving everything because I wrote about their island. So the next day, the father comes to me and he says, his name is Tad Camara, known as Mr. Aloha here on Molokai. And he says, Bobo, you should be writing songs. And I said, you know, I've heard all these stories about the music industry. I've experienced, you know, working with people like Clive Davis. They're very extreme, demanding people. Why should I complicate my life even more? And he said, no, Bobble, you should write songs. You have a gift. So the next day, they built me a house. They lived on the water. They built me a house because after my first year visiting them, I could not stay in a facility with 11 kids and dogs and cats and rats and every other animal you can imagine running through the house. They were very, very local. And what ended up, but very good and giving and kind, and really embracing me with love and aloha and encouragement. So the next day at my little house they built for me, a knock on the door, and this guy named Sterling Kalua, this Hawaiian that looked like King Kamehameha, looks at me. He's in lava lava, which is like a wrap around his waist, like a towel, but it's not. If I said that, they'd kill me. But that's the only way I can describe it best for our non-Hawaiians. And he goes, I hear you have great lyrics. Let's write some music together. And just like the Water Club, that one gig that I did, we wrote one song together called Song from Home. It turned into 50 the next year. And I found myself writing songs for local artists, getting their hits on the radio, producing. I met a gentleman by the name of Brad Thane, and serendipity, at the same time, he had moved to Molokai, away from LA, and he needed somebody to help him run his record company. He chose me, and I had all the connections with the Hawaiians on Molokai, and we started a record label called Monkey Pod Records of Molokai. And that's how my journey began as a songwriter turned into record exec back in 1997.
Wow. Bobby, where do you get your inspiration to write?
Great question. It comes from pain. It comes from pain and suffering, having many relationships in my life, 27 girlfriends, you know, that kind of went north, south, east, and west. It came from inspiration, perspiration, and exhilaration all at the same time, colliding. And it's the good things in life. It's the beauty. It's love. It's passion. It comes from love. It really comes from love, because love is the source of everything in our world. And when you tap into love and you connect it with music, you know, music, I have a philosophy: God, music, and Molokai saved my life. So I owe my life to God. Now at this stage of life and game, because I'm not a kid anymore, even though I still act like one and like one, I still use music as my vehicle to get through life and to write to correct the wrongs in life. In the early 2000s, I had a very, very difficult situation happen to me. As I was being introduced to the music industry in Hawaii, I was kind of downsizing my life as being a DJ in New York. And I was making a transition at a late part of my life, going from DJing, traveling all over, to writing songs, because I really loved it. It was a shot in the arm for me, especially at my age in the 40s. So what happened was, the guy that gave me my break, Brad Thane, Monkey Pod Records, we had one album we released. It did okay. The second one, I wrote all the songs for it. It was called Shock of the Moon. And the artist's name was Daryl Librato. He was a 9-year-old kid that was living in the east end of Molokai. No running water, no electricity, no phone. And he was taken away from his parents by the CPS because there was abuse there. And he was adopted, the word is called hanai in Hawaii, by a kumahula, another hula teacher. And they didn't know what to do with him. So they brought him into the studio one day, and he could sing like Michael Jackson. He was Spanish Hawaiian, good looking boy. And, but that first studio, he did nothing but rib me, tease me, joke with me, didn't do anything he was supposed to do. I said, you know what? This kid reminds me of a punk from Queens. I'm done. So they kept bringing him back and he kept saying, where's Bob? Where's Bob? I was his court jester. So what ended up happening was I ended up becoming his father he never had. And he was the son I never wanted. So I became his manager, his producer, and his album, Shock of the Moon, was like a huge hit. 25,000 women, little girl fans. I got him involved in youth empowerment programs like DARE, drug awareness, resistance education, MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, the American Cancer Society, all because he was a role model, because of his song. All these kids looked up to him. So what happened was, here we were, Brad Thane, Sterling Kalu, and myself, my writing partner, all three, we were like a trinity. We were really moving forward. And then Sterling ended up having human tragedy in his life. He lost two boys, 18 and 21, in the same area from drunk drivers, the same year, 2 months apart, 2 miles apart. And he had to take a break, and justifiably. And, you know, one of the sad things he said to me, he goes, you know, I could see a kua is God in Hawaiian. I could see a kua taking one, but not two. And I said, you can't think like that, you know? So while he was healing, we started continuing on Daryl's path. And what happened was, after Sterling healed as much as he could, the success of Shock of the Moon was huge. We were working on Sterling's album called Feel the Mana. Mana means power. It's an incredible album. And what ended up happening was, all of a sudden, my record partner starts getting pain in his chest. So we didn't think much of it. We said, it's probably agita. Take some bromo seltzer, Pepto-Bismol, it'll go away. It never did. Turned out to be esophageal cancer. Stage 4, he was given 6 months to live. And that's when he came to me and said, Bobby, I need you to do me a favor. I'm going to be going through some really hell in the next 6 months. I've got a 3-year-old kid. I got my wife. I need somebody to be here, live here on Molokai. I was living in New York at the time, traveling all over, and every free minute I had, I'd come to Molokai to do these albums. And he goes, I need somebody to help me go through my chemo treatment. So I said, let me think about this. Then, you know, I thought about being a Christian and following the way of Christ, which I try to do as much as I can. And I said, you know, this guy's in a worse position than I am, and I can't be thinking about myself. Let me do the right thing. So I went to him and I committed to doing it. And I don't know how I did it, but I have records of all my travels. And every gig, I'd be doing a gig in the Bahamas, fly to Hawaii to be with him, to take him for his chemo. Then I'd be doing another one in LA, back to Hawaii every week until he passed on. And what ended up happening was, the night before he died, I was sitting on those fish ponds I showed you. It was a full moon. And I wrote this song called Two Hands in a Prayer. And because that's all he had left. And it became a huge hit in film. And it was those, back to your original question, it was those situations like that induced emotion, that created a catharsis in the form of writing songs to help those inspire, so they can do the same. It's a tough story. It was really tough seeing him die. I never saw anybody die like that. And, you know, it was hard. And the journey continued. After he passed on, we had a celebration of life event at his house. He had this big house overlooking the mountains with a stage and everything. So at the same time, a guy by the name of Eddie Vedder, I'm sure you heard of him, from Pearl Jam, moved to Molokai. He wanted, because no one knew who he was. He had a real paranoia about being known and
Mm.
assaulted for his pop fame. So he moved here with no one even knew what Pearl Jam. They thought was like something that grew in a shell, you know, pearl shell. So he moved here. We tried to reach him many times, Brad and myself. He never got back to us. But when he heard that Brad died, he came over to the celebration, and boy, did I make him feel guilty. Anyway, if you only answered an email, if you only gave us a minute of your time. So what ended up happening was, at the party celebration, I had a keyboard player named Boom Gasper. And Boom was this Hawaiian, very poor, didn't have many teeth. He lived in a shack. He ate food out of No Frills can of No Frills pork. I'm an organic person. So, you know, this is like unfathomable in my dietary cuisine. And he was a recovering drug addict, but we gave him a break to work with the kid, Daryl, and he was our keyboard player. He played B3. So, dig this. At the celebration of life, Boom's playing. I'm sitting next to Eddie, scolding him. And I say to him, you see that guy? He's the best B3 player in the state of Hawaii. 3 weeks later, Pearl Jam's keyboard player quit. Boom became friends with Eddie Vedder. He became his keyboard player and toured the world for the next 20 years as a member of Pearl Jam. He got teeth. He still lives in a shack, but he upgraded it. And he doesn't eat no frill canned pork anymore. So, you know, these stories are one of many that have happened to my life that have gotten me to where I am before. And, you know, the music business is a rough one, Christine. It's not easy. I've got a lot of the odds are always stacked against you, but it's luck, it's talent, it's blessings, and it's also timing that gets you to where you are and where you want to be. And right now in my life, I live where I want to be and not where I have to be. Thank God. So that's a little bit about the story of where I am and to be.
For the people, mothers for the people, message to the people, love one, love all, message to the people, love one's created equal, power to the people.